Hello everyone, my name is Ian and you're watching Big Rock Moto. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're new here and you like this kind of content, I hope you'll consider subscribing. Welcome to episode 3 of the 2024 Kawasaki KLX300. In episode 3, I'm going to be taking you through a lot of the modifications and upgrades and changes that I've done to the stock bike to make it fit the way I want to ride the bike. So we're going to do things like adjust the suspension, change the tires, change the gearing, put on protection parts, change the handlebars. It's a pretty long episode, but I think you're going to enjoy it. And I talk through a lot of the reasoning of the upgrades that I decided to do. Now, when we're changing things on our motorcycle, when we're making upgrades, and you know this if you're a rider yourself, an enthusiastic hobby rider, you know that things, it's a journey. It's not like you just make a couple things, change a couple things, and then that's it forever. It's a constant journey of messing with stuff, trying to improve it. Sometimes you go backwards, sometimes you need to, take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and then you change and improve. So with that in mind, watch till the end of the video because I'm going to recap the summary of some of the things I did. There was a couple things I wasn't totally happy with that I'm going to need to adjust. So keep that in mind as you go through and watch this episode. The other thing, the disclaimer I always like to give, I am an affiliate of Rocky Mountain ATV and other companies that I have links for below. So if you purchase any parts and accessories or gear using those links, I do get a small commission, which I reinvest back into content creation to support independent journalism here on this channel. So I just want you to know that. It's important to me that you understand how that works. So there is a bit of a financial relationship there with these bike builds that I'm doing. But I hope it's a good thing. I think it's useful. I think it's constructive. I have a good time doing it. And if you use the links to buy stuff for your own bike, whether it's a KLX or something else, it's an amazing way to support the channel that doesn't cost you anything. All right, well, with that out of the way, let's get into the garage and start building this bike. All right, so the KLX300 is really not a bad motorcycle right out of the box. And as you saw in episode 2, you could take this bike right out onto your local trails and have a great time. It's also really good for commuting, riding around town, just general, riding around and doing some lighter trails, some fire roads, even single track. However, for the way I want to use the bike, I really want to set my KLX up more for some rockier single track, some tougher trails. I'm not going to really be commuting on it. I'm not going to be doing a lot of highway miles, so that kind of dictates how I'm going to set it up. Now, for anybody out there with a dual sport bike, DRZ, KLX, CRF300, whatever it might be, there are some essential categories, essential mods I think that can really improve the bike right off the bat that aren't going to break the bank. So it really comes down to protecting the bike, so skid plate, hand guards, things like that, adding a little bit of performance and ergonomics, so getting the right handlebar for you, getting the right grips, getting the right foot pegs, adjusting your controls. Also dialing in the suspension, so doing what we can do with the factory suspension, because I'm not changing out the suspension on this bike, at least not at this point. Dialing that in, setting the sag, setting our clickers to get the thing to perform the best that we can for our weight and our riding style. So those are kind of the things that we're going to do. And then you go into phase 2, phase 3. So, do you want a more comfortable seat? Do you want an aftermarket exhaust? Do you want sort of the more expensive stuff that you can get later? But we're going to try to stick to sort of phase 1 in this first video, which is, protection, basic performance, ergonomics, and a little bit of luggage solutions as well. So here's the bike up on the Harbor Freight lift. I love this lift, by the way. This thing is just invaluable. I got it on sale Black Friday. I think it was, $450. I think it was less than $500. Then I bought the accessory wheel chock, which still doesn't work very well. You definitely have to use straps to tie down the bike. The wheel chocks just don't cut it. But this is so nice when you're working on your wheels and tires, or you're working on the engine, or working lower on the bike without having to kneel down on the ground. That's been a great addition to the shop. So you can see here all the stuff that we've got going on. So let me start the most important stuff. And in the description and a pinned comment, I'm going to organize this in phases. Phase 1, I think, is the most important stuff. And then phase 2 and 3 are like nice to have things you can get later. So we're going to do hand guards. So I've got the Tusk D-Flex Pro handguard kit in Kawasaki green, which I think will be nice. You can see the bar mounts. We've also got the big bar kit, so we're going to go up to a 1 1/8 inch handlebar, which is stronger. So we've got the adapter kit for that, which also gives us a little bit of rise in the bars. We're going to do IMS foot pegs. So if you see the factory foot pegs, like in comparison, yeah, these, when you stand up on these off-road, it's like standing on a pencil. It's really something that was bugging me a lot. We're going to change the mirrors out to double take mirrors. That's not absolutely necessary, but they're definitely more durable than the factory mirrors, and you can fold them in. Lithium battery, again, this is pretty reasonable cost from Tusk. I think it was like 80 bucks or 100 bucks, something like that, but it saves a lot of weight and gives you more power. So I don't think that's essential, but it's a nice to have. Maybe that's in phase 2. Gearing, that's one thing I haven't talked about yet. So for the way I'm going to ride the bike, I'm going to change the gearing. I'm going to reduce the gearing to give myself a better performance on the trail. It is going to sacrifice highway riding. We might be kind of buzzed out at 60 miles an hour. We'll have to see how that goes. I've got rim locks. We'll get to the tires here in a second. I've got pillow top grips, which are really comfortable. And underneath those grips, I'm going to put the Tusk grip heaters, although I'm probably not going to wire them in today. I've got a folding shift lever from Tusk. I've got some tools from Tusk to adjust the suspension. This is a preload adjustment tool, and I'll link the tools below as well. So this allows me to adjust my preload without taking the shock off the bike, which you'll see. I've got a sag measuring tool. This in this box is a rear cargo rack, so we can attach a cargo bag. This is a fender eliminator, so we can get rid of this big, ugly, heavy kind of stock fender. That's not essential either. So, you know, that's not really essential. The battery's probably not really essential. Just like I'm trying to save you guys some money, right? If you don't want to spend too much money. Now, for the way I'm going to use the bike, I'm changing the tires. So you can see the stock tire here and what I'm going to. So I'm going to the Tusk Recon hybrids. These are a hybrid knobby trials tire. So they're extremely good in rocks, single track, really difficult off-road terrain that I like to ride. They're going to fit my riding style, but if you're using your bike as an all-around dual sport, commuting, maybe doing some fire roads and light trails on the weekends, the factory tires are really pretty good. So don't change out your factory tires unless you feel you're lacking in the off-road performance area, because these are not even road legal and they're really going to sacrifice your handling on the road. They're not going to be as safe and stable on the highway. Keep that in mind. The seat. I have a seat concept seat. Now, again, this is one of those things that unless you feel you need it, don't get it, because it's expensive. It's like $300 or somewhere around that. The factory seat's not terrible. It's just I'm looking for more comfort, so I'm doing that upgrade for me. We looked at the tires. Oh, in terms of protection, this is a really important one. So you can see the bike really, in terms of protection, just has this tiny little plate. So everything's kind of exposed down here. So I got the Tusk skid plate for the KLX. That's going to go right up on here like that, and that's going to be a very nice, very important. If you only get a few things for your bike, I would say skid plate, the hand guards, the foot pegs, and tires to suit your riding style. If you just did those 4 things, I think, you know, you'd be pretty good to go. All right, and what else? I think that's about it for now. What do you say we get started with the wrenching? So if you saw episode 1 and 2, you know the meaning of this. So it's not really a modification, it's a repair. I dropped the bike in the garage the first day I got it home, never even rode it, 0 miles, smashed the LCD, which you can see up here, smashed it into bits, and it's a $500 part, so I don't want to drop this on the garage as I'm filming it. So it finally came in, so I'm going to replace this. At least then we're starting with, you know, a factory bike again after not having a dash for the first couple rides I went on. So we'll do that, which is nice to have. That finally came in. It was like a month-long back order. But actually, I'm going to start, because I've got the lift in the up position, I'm going to start with the skid plate and the foot pegs, because it'll allow me then easier to get the motorcycle jack under the engine to lift the bike up to do the tires. So it's actually why I'm going to cheat a little bit and do those things first. All right, let's do the skid plate. So you can see the skid plate comes with the instructions here. Now, as I go through this, I don't really consider these videos install vids. I don't really do those. I don't want that liability or that responsibility, frankly. So, you know, go with the manufacturer, in this case, Tusk or Rocky Mountain, for install instruction, things like that. You can use my videos as kind of a guide to see what you're getting into, but don't consider me an install video. Just keep that in mind. So it's got 2 sets of bolts with washers and 2 frame brackets. So it looks like there's some holes, back here. So we're going to remove this little factory plate, I would assume, and then thread these back ones in, and then there's some brackets here on the front. This should be literally a 5-minute install to get this bad boy on. So I'll get to work. I'll do a little time lapse. All right, there she is, skid plate installed. About as easy as install as you can get. The only thing is, you know, you kind of got to hold these frame brackets. It's kind of hard to see in there. These black frame brackets with one hand while you get the screw started with the other hand. So you kind of need to be like, you know, you wish you were an octopus if you had like more hands and fingers, right? But it's not too bad. And what I liked was they gave you, well, if you can see here in the video, I don't know, they're Torx head screws. So I really appreciate that, because I find that the Allen heads, whenever they're like an Allen head bolt like that, they always seem to get stripped out. So I really do appreciate the Torx heads, and you can see the back mounting here. Also, this completely mounts to the frame, and you have, of course, the frame running under here, so no mounts into the engine, so your engine is safe from impact. So you know what, gosh, I think this thing is less than $100, maybe 80 bucks in today's money. That's not bad at all. All right, let's take a look at the Footpegs. Now, IMS Footpegs, you know, I'm not sponsored by IMS, obviously. I don't have any sponsorships, actually. But I did get these as part of a promo with Rocky Mountain, you know, doing this bike build and using my affiliate links and all that. But what I'm trying to say is, don't cheap out on Footpegs. Like, I know there's some knockoff, you know, third-party ones, like, I'm trying not to say Chinese, but they probably are. Nothing against Chinese stuff, but like on AliExpress or Amazon or eBay, I don't trust those. For my foot controls, it's like one of my primary controls into the bike. I don't want that breaking on a trail ride because I wanted to save 50 bucks or something. These are around 100 bucks. They're one of the only legitimate aftermarket options for the KLX. So IMS Superstock Footpegs, just stick with those, please. Don't take a risk when it comes to your Footpegs, I'm begging you. Okay, so you can see the difference in size here is pretty dramatic, you know, probably almost double the platform. So to put Footpegs on, like, they didn't include any different pins or cotters or springs or anything. So we're going to be using the factory pin, spring, and cotter pin down here. So it involves taking out this cotter pin, taking the spring and the little pin out, and then just replacing the Footpeg. So not too hard. It can just be a little finicky to get things in here lined up with the pressure of the spring and then getting it through. But I don't think this bike should be too bad. It's usually KTMs that are really difficult with this. So let's get started. All right, well, that was about the easiest Footpeg I've ever done. The only, you know, part I hate is always messing with these little cotter pins. It's probably good to put a new cotter pin in. So don't, you know, do as I say, not as I do. So, you know, I probably have new cotter pins somewhere in the shop, but I just figured reuse these, and that's fine. But yeah, really no big deal at all. So I'm going to go repeat on the other side, but you can see here that difference. So I'm so glad to get these factory Footpegs off. I just couldn't stand these things. Literally couldn't stand them. Get it? It's a joke. Dad joke. All right, let's talk about bars, handlebars. So there's a lot of different handlebar bends and heights you can choose from, and it really comes down to personal preference and your height and things like that and how you tend to ride. I'll put the specifics here below of this bar. but I believe these are a Moto bend. They're the Tusk Chub bars, and I'm going to show you how to do this. Again, keeping in mind it's not really technically an install video. So what's going to happen is these stock steel handlebars are going to come off. All the controls are going to come off. The grips are going to come off. We're going to put these bars on with the adapter. Let me show you how that works. So the factory triple clamp gives you a 7/8 inch handlebar mount, but because we're going to a stronger 1 1/8 bar, you have to use these adapters from Tusk that bolt into the triple clamp and then convert the smaller 7/8 mount to the 1 1/8 mount, allowing you to use a stronger handlebar. Now, I suppose you could technically argue that because it's still technically a 7/8 mount on a triple clamp, that's kind of your weak point. But again, I don't think too many people are snapping handlebar mounts and handlebars riding a KLX300. Hopefully not. So we'll go ahead and get started on this. The way I like to start with this is get the clutch and brake controls off, the 8mm bolts, get those things out of the way. Then we'll loosen up the switch gear, which we can slide off the bars. We have to get the grips off, to cut the left grip off, and hopefully that's not too much of a pain. I don't know how much glue they put on from the factory. Get the grips off. Then we can kind of shimmy things around to get the controls off. Sometimes you can separate the controls into two pieces here, like there's screws from the back, but sometimes they don't. So it just depends. I like to just slide them off if I can. And then we'll go ahead and start to get stuff reassembled. And so we'll get the bar on, then we'll get the controls on, the grips, and then forgot to do the heated grips. Don't want to forget about those. Don't let me forget, you guys. Remind me to do that. Then we'll do the handguards at the end. So handguards are here. You can see the mounts and different stuff for the handguards. So by the way, I like to use this battery powered cordless ratchet. It makes all my mechanical jobs so much easier. I'm not sponsored by them, but I'll link this below. I bought this on Amazon. I paid my own money for it. It's called S-Long. There's other brands, but anyway, it's a rechargeable battery, and it just makes stuff really fast. What I like to do so I don't lose track of stuff like this is put the, like for the perches or for the clutch and brake mounts, just kind of loosely screw those back in so I don't get things mixed up. So I've got that loosened off there. But see, then that's connected to the control here. So again, you got to kind of be careful not to damage stuff. So now what I need to do is get these grips off, and we'll see how this goes. Kind of hard to do everything with one hand here. Well, the glue's not too bad on these. I'm getting off easy on this one. Ah, no problem. This will allow us to then loosen this and slide this off once we get the handlebars loosened. So what's going to happen? So what's going to happen is, like, I didn't mean for these to come off, but we can put these back in the assembly. It's not that hard. Now I have to loosen the handlebar to kind of move the handlebar that way to be able to get this off. Well, I could just take these cables off, but I don't want to take it apart any further because it can be kind of like, okay, how does this go back together again? And you know, anyway, it's just easier. It would have been better just to loosen this, leave it all together, and then remove the handlebar, slide the handlebar that way, and then just pull that whole thing off as an assembly instead of disassembling this. That would have been the way to do it. All right, so one thing you might run into if you're doing this on your own bike is if you see right there, there's this little tab inside the controls on each side. What that does is it lines up with the hole in this factory handlebars to align the switch gear. You're going to have to break that off or shave that off because your replacement handlebars obviously don't have that. So the controls won't go on unless you break that off. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and get the adapters put on, and then we'll start getting these handlebars put together. All right, you can see how this is going together here. So the adapters, well, I guess I can pull the handlebars off. The adapters go on here to the triple clamp, and then the new handlebars go into these adapters. Now, one thing I find, because there's a tiny bit of play in the mounts, you can kind of loosely snug the bolts and then make sure, kind of tap in your handlebar to kind of get these things aligned, and then go ahead and do your final tightening of your adapters. Just be careful because they're using Allen head bolts, and don't strip those. So don't go crazy with the torque. These do come with factory Loctite on them from Tusk, from Rocky Mountain. So I'm going to go ahead and get the handlebars put on, get those put on. So the top caps you get look like this. And then oh no, I need to slide back the controls on. I'll just do a little video, and then we'll get the handlebars mounted. Handlebars are on. I've got the controls back on. Now notice I have all the controls still loose. Everything is still loose because I'm going to do the hand guards, and I'd like to leave everything loose until I've got everything installed, hand guards, mirrors, all of it, and then tighten the controls sitting on the bike so I can align them with the angle I like with my hand, my personal preferences. So I'll get things kind of snug just to where I can move them a little bit, but I want to get all the hand guards and everything put on so we don't tighten anything before we do all that. And then we'll make sure all of our cables and everything, we don't have any undue tension on any cables, because we have raised things a little bit. So it is a little bit of a concern. I have to look at some of that here. We've raised things about that much, so not a huge amount, but again, and then I am going to start with the handlebars in a neutral position. So you can see they have a guide here. So I'm going to start them at 0. So the handlebars are pretty much, the bend of the handlebars kind of in line with the fork. So start out there and then make your adjustments after that. Rotating the bars forward will make the bike steer a little faster, but it'll be less stable. Rotating them back, which some people do for comfort, will make the bike a little more stable, but it's going to steer kind of slow and lazy. So again, but it depends on your body type and everything like that. So I'm going to I'm going to work on the grips, get the heated grips things on, then the hand guards, and we'll go from there. So I'm putting on my heating elements here, my Tusk heated grips, before I put the grips on. And I have a whole dedicated video on doing this install with the heated grips and the wiring when I did it on my 890. So I'll link to that below, or if that's not published, I'll link that in later. I haven't published that video yet as I'm filming this, but I have a whole install video for heated grips that you can put on any motorcycle for about 40 bucks. So I'm not going to go into that, but you can see the elements go under here before you put the grips on. And I like to use my trusty hairspray, spray them, and then slide on my grips, and then hairspray dries and everything's good to go. But anyway, I'm getting into that video, so I'm not going to get into that. We'll cover that separately. All right, well, it's the next day. It's actually about 24 hours later, but to the magic of YouTube, it seems like just the next minute. Here's where we are on the bike. I finished up the controls and handlebars, so I had to cut the throttle tube to get the new handguard mount through, and put the new grips on and do all that. I had an issue with this rotating because I cut off that knob thing that lines it up on the old handlebars. So I had to wrap some tape under here to get this to grip better. Beyond that, I guess, and I just have my wires for my grips just zip tied there right now before I get everything wired in. Beyond that, I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. So we've got the nice Tusk handguards with all the deflectors and sliders and stuff here. I'm pretty happy with this setup. I've got the handlebars in a neutral position, so I'm happy with all that. So now what I'm going to do is do the battery, do the rear rack, and the tail tidy. So you can see, let's start with the battery. So Tusk Lithium Pro battery. I mean, it's feather light, similar capacity, actually a little bit more capacity in cranking amps than the factory battery. So that'll be a nice weight savings there, and lithium's just better. they give you all these different mounting pads to size to the battery box. They give you new hardware. So we'll go ahead and swap this in right now. The factory battery's under the left side panel. You can see right there. I've also got the seat off, the rear tail bag off, because we're going to be tearing all this apart to do the rear rack and get rid of this fender. So onward. Right, now we have a lithium battery. So they give you all these foam pads to pack around the battery to make it nice and secure. You don't want the battery to be able to move around in the battery box. This isolates it from vibration. The lithium battery is much smaller physically than the lead acid battery. I'd say it's a good 4 pounds lighter too. And they give you the hardware, the screws to put in with the different terminals that come with it. So that's done. We can move on. Well, let's make sure we have power. That looks good. All right. Well, things don't always go to plan. So the fender eliminator kit that I got for this bike is for a KLX300, but for 2024, Kawasaki redesigned this area back here, new light. The fender assembly is different, so the tail tidy didn't actually nothing lined up. So I got everything all taken apart, all the wiring apart, everything. And I couldn't make it work. So I had to put together the stock fender back together, and I cut the fender here. So I essentially just trimmed my stock fender up to here. I did lose my license plate light, although the tail light's going to kind of illuminate the license plate, to be honest, so it should still be legal. Had to do my own custom little job here, but it's nice because now I don't have that whole thing kind of flapping around back here. So that's good. So we've got that done. Now I'm going to do the rear rack, which is over here. All right, well, that's not bad at all. I'm actually really happy with the way that looks and the way that sits on the bike. Really easy install. You bolt some stuff here kind of through the frame underneath the fender. There's some spacers, and then of course I still have to put the seat on, so there's some spacers and they give you longer bolts for that. But this is great because you get kind of a grab handle here and you get all this cargo room, plenty of slots for tie downs, whatever you want to do. I am very, very happy with that. All right, so let's look at the seats now. So, as I mentioned before in the start of the video, you may not need to do this. It's not a cheap upgrade. This is definitely like that nice to have stuff. Stock seat, if you're okay with it, then just stick with it. But you can see how much wider of a seating surface there is. So the stock seat's kind of like angled on the sides. This one gives you more of a flat seating surface, but it's still narrow at the front. Let me kind of show you what I'm talking about here. So the width of this seat is about 9 inches at the widest point. The width of the stock seat is only about 7 inches there on this top surface. But at the front, this tapers down to a nice 5 inches, which is actually about the same as the stock seat. So if you're sitting forward, you should be able to still get your legs down pretty nicely, but you've got this nice comfortable seating surface in the back. So let's get this on. All right, well, look what we have here. So I found this Rig Gear tail bag. This is the medium size. They make like 3 sizes of this. I've seen it. You've seen it in other videos of mine. Really do like this. It just seemed to fit perfectly on this rear rack. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to put it on this bike and leave it on here. It just fits this bike perfectly. And then I have the Tusk Small Olympus tank bag, which was sitting on the Africa Twin, but I think it's a better size for this bike, and I'll put the large one on the, I'm sorry, not the Africa Twin, the Transalp. I'll put the large one on the Transalp and leave the small one on here. I really kind of like how this fits. So you can see we've got our luggage set up here. That's not bad at all. So I'm going to try that, see how I like it, and of course the new seat looks really good. I can't wait to get out and actually ride this darn thing. The only thing, I've still got to do the tires, which I'm going to do tomorrow morning. It's about 7 p.m. at night right now, so I think I'm going to call it a day for today for me, and of course not for this video. So, oh, no, there's one more thing. I'm sorry. I'm going to do the rear sag. So I had on my notes from the first ride that I needed to set the sag and add a little compression and rebound damping. So I'm going to crank up this rear preload. So the way that we do that, a lot of people use a screwdriver. I mean, the correct way to do it really is probably to remove the shock from the bike and do it on a bench vise or something. But Tusk sells this preload adjustment tool just for this with this end that you can hammer on. And you basically attach it here and you're just turning in this collar. So the top one is a lock ring and the bottom one is the preload collar. You just turn this in to add preload. So I'm going to give it quite a number of turns. And and then I'll measure my sag kind of and then go from there. But anything's going to be an improvement because I'm kind of overloading the bike with my riding weight of about 200 pounds. So we'll do that and then I'm going to call it a night. All right, welcome to yet another day of the KLX300 wrenching project. So tires, rim locks, stuff like that. So let me show you what I've got. So I've got the Tusk severe duty motorcycle tubes. They're a 3mm thick. I chose those. I didn't want to go with a 4mm just because those get super heavy. So that's a nice upgrade going from the super light duty, probably 1mm tubes that it comes with. I got the Tusk billet aluminum rim locks, so they're really lightweight. The reason that we need to use rim locks, and the factory wheels do have holes already for the rim locks. Where is it? Like right there, there's a little plug for it. So that's good. The reason I want to use rim locks is because I'm going to run these Tusk Recon tires at around probably 12 PSI, and I don't want the tire spinning on the rim and ripping out the valve stem or causing any issues. So we'll put the rim locks in, then we'll get it on the tire balancer. I also use a Tusk tire balancer. I'll link all the tools in here below as well. Yeah, so let's get started. I'm a huge fan of this Rabiconda tire changer. I know it's kind of an expensive investment, but I've, no joke, probably changed 50 to 100 sets of tires. Street bike tires, adventure bike tires, dirt bike tires with this thing. The bead breaker is really good. It gives you a nice place to, get leverage with the irons. It's just an awesome tool, really invaluable to me. So I've got the factory tire off, the factory thin, like super thin, probably like 1mm thick tube. So now I'm going to get the rim lock installed. Get the rim lock ready, get the new tire on, new tube, new rim lock, and we'll go from there. All right, so working through this process, I've got the new tube covered with baby powder, talcum powder to help things move around. I've got the rim lock loosely installed. So the deal with these rim locks is, so I've got it just barely threaded in, and then you got to push it in like that. Because if you don't, this you can't really see, but you have to have room to get the tire over the rim, between the rim and the rim lock. So this has to be as loose as you can get and pushed in, otherwise you won't be able to do that. So having a rim lock does make tire changes more of a pain in the butt. Honestly, it truly does. But you kind of need it if you're going to do dirt bike stuff at low pressures. So now the next step is I need to get the tube installed. I like to have the tube just a little bit like of air, not enough to even measure, but just so it has some shape. That way I just feel like you're much less likely to pinch the tube when you go to lever the tire on. Now these tires are, a fairly soft compound, so they're not too hard to put on. Even on a cold day today, it's about 45 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm going to go ahead and get this done. All right, so I got everything mounted up properly. Now, once your tire is on and your bead is set, you've got it inflated, you've got everything lined up. Now, the final step is to then tighten down the nut on the rim lock here is the final step. That locks the tire into the rim and prevents it from spinning, hopefully at low pressure. So it took about 35 psi to get the bead to kind of seat on there. So we'll have to adjust that, of course, before we ride down to our riding pressure. So now I'm going to get the wheel and tire back up on the motorcycle. It could be it's a little bit wider than the factory tire. So I don't know, it might be a little tricky to kind of wiggle in here. Hopefully you won't have any interference. I think we'll be okay. But you never know when you're starting to change stuff. It is a 120. I got a 120 width. It's a 110. It's a 110/18, so it shouldn't be too wide. The factory tire is a 460, which is a different ratings or measuring system, but that should be about equivalent. But this definitely has more sidewall to it and just more, it's a beefier, bigger tire. So. All right, since I've got the rear axle loose and everything, now is the perfect time to change my gearing because I'm gonna have to adjust my chain tension once we do that. So I'm gonna take off this cover, take off the nut on the front counter sprocket, probably use an impact wrench for that just because they can be kind of tight. I'll see what the washer situation is. I'm gonna change to a 13 tooth. I got this from Tusk, of course. And it's gonna lower the gearing quite a bit, which is better for the trail. I don't know, it might ruin the highway performance. We're gonna have to wait to find out. So I'm gonna get started with this. So if you're working on your own motorcycle, I see this a lot on dual sport motorcycles. They have this arrangement where there's a washer under this nut and it's like concave or it's kind of folded over. That helps, it's a safety feature so this can never back off. What you have to do is get a tool. I'm using this shock preload tool. You could use a screwdriver and then kind of flatten with a hammer, kind of carefully flatten out this washer. Otherwise, you won't be able to get this nut off. So I'm going to go ahead and finish doing that, and then I'll get my impact wrench and just take this nut off, and then we'll change the sprocket. That makes life so much easier. Now, if you don't have air tools, the way you can do this is you have to put the bike on the ground, use one foot to stand on the rear brake, reach over the bike with the breaker bar with your socket and try to do it that way. But if you have air tools, life is a lot easier. Okay, the nut's back on. The washer, so you want to fold that washer back out just to give you that safety margin. You know, that's how this is designed, so make sure you do that. Now, because we put on a smaller front sprocket, the chain is really loose. So I have to adjust the chain tension, which means, you know, loosening these lock nuts here on both sides, one here and one here, and then turning this out so it's pushing the axle back, right? Now, if you run out of travel, which can happen, then you get into like, you may have to get a different length chain. You may have to take a link out of the chain, which can mean getting a chain breaker and a chain press and using all. So anyway, things can get complicated, but it kind of looks like this is already pretty far back. So I don't know, we're going to see if I have enough travel here. It sounds like a small difference, but actually when you move the wheel back, it makes the wheelbase of the bike a little bit longer and makes the bike a little more stable, something I've noticed with other bikes. So, all right, for setting the chain tension, the bike has a sticker right here. It says 1.2 to 1.6 inches, measured right in the middle. So if you pull this and you measure this with a tape measure, you should get about the 1.2 to 1.6 inches. You can go a little bit on the smaller end of that range, knowing that the chain is stretching as the bike gets more miles on it. So I have it about right. I might loosen it off maybe a tiny bit. That's about measured about 1.3 inches of play. Because as the suspension moves up and down, it takes up that slack. That's why the chain has to be kind of loose like this when the bike is unloaded. All right, totally different bike. It looks so different now with the Meteor tires, the different seat, the luggage. Now, the Yoshimura exhaust is part of another video I'm doing later, so that wasn't part of this video you're watching right now. That'll be featured in one of the future episodes, so just ignore that, pretend that's not there. But man, I'm really liking the looks of this thing, and the stance of it is so much nicer now. It just looks like a proper dual sport bike. It actually looks really good. And the tail tidy, well, me cutting the fender, I guess, helps with that. The tires look great. Man, I'm really stoked about this. So I did have a couple issues. Because the bars are higher, the cables really had no slack, no extra room. So I had some issues with the clutch cable and the throttle cables kind of binding at full lock. So you have to test at full lock to make sure you don't have anything getting too tight, which can interfere with the controls. And I was having that problem. So I had to actually cut the frame bracket, or unbolt this frame bracket down in here to give the cable some more room and kind of move, just jostle things a little bit around. And now I'm okay. But beware, if you're going to raise your bars on a KLX, which you do with these big bar adapters, you may run into that. So it's always something to kind of, deal with. I also forgot to put the tires on the balancer. I don't know why I forgot on both tires. So what I did is I just put a small weight opposite the rim lock. So if you go opposite the rim lock and the valve stem, 180 degrees, I put a weight there to kind of counterbalance that out. These rim locks are pretty light, so, shouldn't be too much of an issue, but I'm really liking this thing. So the only thing we need to do now is just get this thing out for a good ride. Nothing. Following a guy on a T7, so I have no excuse. Thanks. Whoa! All right, well, if you got this far, thank you so much for watching this. Hope it's been useful. A few notes here at the end. So like I mentioned at the beginning, making these kind of changes to your motorcycle, it's not a one and done type of thing. And I've certainly learned that over the years. So, you just have to adjust things as you go out and ride, go on some of your rides, come back, make some tweaks. I enjoy that process. And the thing is, it's more about the journey and not the destination. It's like the cliche we always say, but I think it's true actually. And it's a fun thing to do, to keep modifying your bike. So with that in mind, there are a couple things that I wasn't happy with. So what happened was I did all these changes. And probably it's best to do less changes at one time, because the thing is, if you're not happy with then how the bike is performing, you're kind of like, well, what aspect of the change, what aspect did I change that caused this? So if you change it's like an experiment. If you have too many variables changing at once, you kind of don't know what got messed up. So there's a few things that I think I messed up. The handling, I put so much preload into the suspension, into the rear suspension, that I changed the rake of the bike and made it handle kind of nervous and twitchy. And I think, it just wasn't handling great. I wasn't happy with that. So what I'm doing now, I've actually already done it, is dial back some of that rear preload to try to get that back into line so the bike doesn't have that twitchy handling. The other thing is the tires. So I don't recommend using non-DOT tires for like a dual sport bike if you're going to ride on the highway much. You don't really need that much aggression, unless you're just using it for single track. So I'm going to go back to, I think, a more of a highway friendly tire. I don't love and it's funny because the Recon tires from Tusk, I really love the way they worked on my KTM 350, but for whatever reason, they don't feel right with the KLX. So I'm going to change them and see what happens. Maybe that front tire is just too wide and it feels like it's catching all the ruts and I just don't have good steering. I'm not really sure. Other thing is that, okay, so we have to talk about power modifications. That's going to be in a future episode. You saw that I did put on a Yoshimura exhaust. They did send that to me. Well, I don't want to get into a big thing about aftermarket exhaust and my feeling about them, but you know, it added a lot of sound, which is almost a little bit too loud. So I'm going to be working on that, maybe to quiet it down or dealing with that somehow. It's just a little bit too loud for my taste. And just putting on an exhaust by itself really doesn't add any power to this bike. So we're going to have a whole separate episode on that. The other thing was the gearing. I didn't like the short gearing. It's too, like it's 60 miles an hour, you're at like 7,000 RPM. It's just too buzzy. So I'm going to go back to the factory gearing. I think that's a good compromise, the way they set that up with the factory gearing. So unless you're just only going to be on single track, I would probably recommend just sticking to that factory gearing. So in the next episodes, I kind of already alluded to this, but we're going to make some more adjustments and tweaks. I'm going to do an episode dedicated to, you know, how do you get more power out of your KLX300? There's ways to do that for free. There's ways to do that cost money. So we'll kind of weigh the pros and cons of all those things. Now, what's my opinion of the KLX300 now that I've owned it for, I guess, what, 6 weeks? I don't know, a couple months. I kind of lost track. I still think, as I claimed earlier, that this is the best dual sport bike you can buy right now for the money. So for around that $6,000 price point, it's the best. Now, the elephant in the room is comparing it to the Honda. So Honda makes a CRF300L. It's a very similar motorcycle. There's a couple main differences that I would say. The Honda suspension is tragically bad, and you will need to change that if you're over like 150 pounds and you ride the bike off-road at more than like a walking pace. So you will need to do that. And that would bring that price or that investment kind of up to the point of the KLX. But the advantage with that would be that you could, for that $1,000 difference in price, if you spent that on suspension on the Honda, you could have it tuned and valved to your exact weight and riding style. Whereas the KLX, you're going with the stock bike and it's not really set up for you. Although the KLX suspension is pretty decent out of the box and will work for a lot of people and the way you're going to ride the KLX as a dual sport bike. So that's kind of like, it kind of evens it out at that point. So it's hard to really choose. The other thing, the one huge downside to the KLX300 that I found is there's no good aftermarket fuel tank options. For the 2024 bikes, I don't think there's anything that fits. For the previous ones, you could get a 2.7 gallon tank from, I think, IMS, but it's like $400. You go from 2.1 gallons to 2.7 gallons. Seems like a very bad investment to me. So with a Honda, you get a lot of aftermarket fuel tank options, so I would say that would kind of push me more towards that Honda. It'd be nice to be able to put on a 3 or a 4 gallon fuel tank for those longer rides. That might push me back towards the Honda if I was starting this again, but they're both good bikes. You just have to kind of take the pros and cons as you will. All right, well, stay tuned for a lot more KLX300 episodes coming in the future. I think they're going to be really cool and informative. It's a great motorcycle. I really do enjoy riding it. I also bought a 2024 Husqvarna FE501S, so if you're interested in that bike, I'm doing a separate series on that. Thank you so much for watching. Ride safe, and I'll see you out there.